If it feels like the early 90s again, don't be alarmed. But yes, Miami and Florida State are both good at the same time, and they're playing in a massive game this coming weekend in Tallahassee. Miami's first road game of the season, I believe. Just short trip up northern Florida there to Tallahassee. But huge game, Miami and Florida State. If you're anywhere near my age and you sort of grew up on college football in the 80s and 90s, this was a huge game every single year. Now, it's been a while since both of these teams have been good at the same time. It feels like, I'm sure if I went back and looked year by year, I could find one here and there, but it feels like this is the biggest Miami-Florida State game in a long, long time, and I think it is. And actually, I think Florida State losing last week on the road at Virginia kind of makes this game even bigger, which might sound a little counterintuitive, but I'll tell you why that is here as we go through today's video. You might be a little surprised, or I don't know, maybe you're not. But Miami's actually a favorite here on the road in Tallahassee. Miami's favored by 4.5. I'm going to break the game down some, but I'm going to be honest. My pick on this game, I'm going to pick which one of these two fan bases is the least annoying. These have been two of the more annoying fan bases on the internet the last couple of years. Florida State, of course, has taken the cake there. But Miami's been pretty annoying, really, since the internet was invented, because they haven't been very good for the majority of time since the internet was invented. They've, of course, been in the ACC for 25 years and never won it. Florida State coming off a 2-10 season, but they both appear to have turned it around this season. Miami is undefeated. Florida State has just the one loss on the road at Virginia. Florida State beat Alabama in week 1. Miami, of course, beat Notre Dame. They then turned around and beat South Florida and Florida. So undefeated. Florida State with just a one loss. Tommy Castellanos, the quarterback at Boston College, the quarterback at Florida State, the transfer from Boston College. Carson Beck, the quarterback at Miami, a transfer from Georgia. So both teams would transfer quarterbacks here. Both teams heavy in the portal. Huge rivalry game. This is a big game every year from your rivalry perspective, and that, of course, is the case again this season. But this season's game does feel a little bit bigger. It feels like these are two of the better teams in the ACC, maybe the two best teams in the ACC. I know Florida State lost to Virginia, but college football is strange that way. It doesn't necessarily mean Virginia's the better team. I just leave that at that. Leave that at that for now. Here's what would worry me for each team. So let's start with Miami. First road game. You never really know how your team is going to respond on the road until you go and do it. Look at Florida State last week, their first road game of the year. They go to Virginia and lose. It's obviously much more difficult to play on the road than it is at home. You've got hostile environments, unfamiliar surroundings, smaller locker rooms. It's not as comfortable. All the normal, typical problems you associate with playing a road game. That, of course, applies to Miami. It also feels like Florida State has something to prove, not just against Miami or not necessarily against Miami, but of course they're coming off one of their worst seasons in a long time. They got a surprise win in week 1 against Alabama, proved a lot of people wrong in that game. And it feels like this is kind of a prove people wrong season for Florida State. And it feels like this is a huge game for Florida State, and Miami could be walking into a very difficult environment there on Saturday. For Florida State, it's Miami's offensive line and Florida State's lack of run defense, particularly in that game against Virginia. It feels like a mismatch here in Miami's favor from that point of view. Miami's got what I think is the best offensive line in the country. It's basically an NFL offensive line. Carson Beck has had 30 minutes to sit back there in the pocket and pick defenses apart, it feels like, on passing plays. No pressure on him by anybody really this season. And he's not the most mobile quarterback, Carson Beck, but he's deadly accurate. He's got an NFL arm, and he can make every single throw. So if you give Carson Beck time to sit in the pocket, he's likely to pick apart almost any defense in the country. And Miami's offensive line is the real deal. But more concerning from a Florida State point of view is sort of their run defense, particularly, like I said, particularly against Virginia. Virginia ran wild against Florida State this past week. It was missed tackles, players missing assignments. It was not a good defensive performance from Florida State, particularly against the run. Virginia moved up and down the field on them. And Miami's got some legitimate running backs in that huge offensive line. You sort of have a tendency to focus on quarterbacks, and I get it. They're the marquee players generally, and in this game, that's the case too. Tommy Castellanos and Carson Beck, two of the better-known players in all of college football. But if I'm Florida State, I would be extremely worried about Miami showing up here and just running it down my throat and not being able to anything, nothing you can do to stop it. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what we see from Miami early in the game as an attempt to establish the ground game. From a coaching perspective here, you got Mike Norvell versus Mario Cristobal. Mike Norvell, I don't think Mike Norvell is a very good coach. I know Florida State had one good season a couple of years ago. It looks like maybe they're going to have another good season now. But the guy's been at Florida State for now, this is his 6th year. He's had 3 losing seasons in 5 years. That's extremely difficult to do at a place like Florida State. It kind of recruits itself. It's in the heart of one of the most talent-rich states in the country when it comes to high school recruiting. They're a huge brand that gives them advantages in portal and things like that. 3 losing seasons in 5 years. It's going to be difficult for anybody to convince me right now that Mike Norvell is a good coach. Outside of that 1 year where they won the ACC, it's been an absolute disaster there for him. And the most concerning part to me about Florida State, Mike Norvell's time there and sort of where they're at, is that he's been there for 5 years and he still finds himself in a position at the end of every season where he has to basically flip his entire roster over through the portal. The high school recruiting there has not worked out for Mike Norvell. Not that they don't have any good players that they recruited, they do, but the majority of their stars are transfer players. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everyone takes in transfers. I think you should take in transfers. But it's alarming to me that they basically are in a situation where they have to flip their roster over every single year, because that's just a huge roll of the dice. It's a bigger roll of the dice, in my opinion, than recruiting really well out of high school, developing those players for a couple of years, and then they become your players, right? You look at last year's Florida State team, flip the roster over, 2-10. The year before that, flip the roster over, 13-0, win the ACC. This year, flip the roster over, beat Bama. They're 3-1 or whatever they are. Look like they're probably going to be a pretty good team. It's just a crapshoot every single year. And you could say, well, college football in general is a crapshoot from year to year. You can be good one year and bad the next, even through high school recruiting. That's true. But generally speaking, the teams that recruit in the top 5 or 10 every single year tend to have pretty good teams every single year. I don't know if there's anybody that recruits in the top 5 or 10 that's had 3 losing seasons in the last 5 years, for example. So I'm not sold on Mike Norvell as a head coach. That doesn't mean he can't have a good season. Ed Orgeron won a natty at LSU. Guy didn't know what he's doing, I don't think. As far as being a head coach, he's more like a cheerleader or like a pep rally guy. He had great coordinators. He had an all-time great quarterback with Burrow and 2 NFL wide receivers, and one of the best offenses we've ever seen ran by his coordinator. So winning doesn't, necessarily mean you're a great coach. You have a good year or whatever. I'm not sold on Mike Norvell. Mario Cristobal, on the other hand, I do think is a good coach. I don't think he's great. At least he hasn't proven to this point in his career that he's a great coach. He's had a couple of good seasons, yet to make the playoffs or the ACC championship game in his time at Miami. Completely blew it last year. 2 head-scratching losses in the last month of the season. They looked like they were in cruise control headed for the postseason last year, and then they had that loss to Georgia Tech and I think Syracuse there in the last month of the season. Derailed everything. They didn't make the ACC championship game or the playoffs. Massive disappointment. One of the best offenses I've ever seen Miami have last year, led by quarterback Cam Ward. Carson Beck's not Cam Ward, but he is a more than capable quarterback who will be playing in the NFL. Like I said, the knock on Carson Beck is that he's not as mobile as some of the sort of flashier quarterbacks that you see in college football today. But when it comes to a sort of prototypical big, tall, strong, pocket passing quarterback who can make every single throw, that's Carson Beck. He looks like he was built in a lab for that. And he needs to be behind a great offensive line. That was one of his biggest problems last year at Georgia. Georgia did not have a great offensive line. And when he got pressured or hurried or Georgia fell behind and he had to sort of force some things, he made some mistakes and threw some interceptions. That hasn't been the case at Miami because he plays behind probably the best offensive line in all of college football. I'm excited about this game. I have a lot of fun messing with Miami and Florida State fans here on this channel over the years because there's a lot of them, and that's not a knock. Like that's when when your fan base has fans everywhere all over the internet, that tells you a lot about sort of that team and that program, at least the enthusiasm around it. Now, neither one of these teams has had all that much to brag about over the last few years, but they're both looking to change that. Here this season. This one was a tough one for me. And so here's how I've decided to sort of come down on this one. Whoever wins this game, that fan base is going to be unbearable for the foreseeable future in terms of how they act on the internet. Both of these fan bases are obnoxious on the internet to start with for really no reason. You can hardly find a Miami fan on the internet who even remembers the last time Miami won a national title. With Florida State, it's been 12 years. 2013 seems like forever ago, and they've been through the Willie Taggart, now 2-10 Mike Norvell sort of time period since then. Those sort of seem like bygone times for both of these programs, but both are in a good spot right now to make a run for the playoffs this year, and that makes this game massively important. This feels like a must-win game for Florida State. It's odd to say that this early in the season. We're still in September. The game would be in October when the game is played, but we're in the first half of the season, and Florida State only has one loss, and we're in a 12-team playoff. So you go, why is it, how's this must win? Because Florida State lost that game to Virginia, and this is why regular season games still matter, despite what some of these anti-playoff people try to tell you about the diminishing importance of the regular season. Because Florida State lost that game to Virginia, a game they weren't supposed to lose, it gives them an ACC loss. Virginia doesn't have any ACC losses. Miami doesn't have any ACC losses. Georgia Tech and Louisville are undefeated. They now play this game. If Florida State loses this game, it's their second ACC loss. Miami will still have none. That will put Florida State 3 games behind Miami. Because they have 2 losses, Miami's got none, and Miami will hold the tiebreaker. It'll put them 3 games behind Virginia, because Virginia will have no ACC losses, and Virginia will hold the tiebreaker over Florida State. And then Georgia Tech and Louisville will still have 0 ACC losses. What that means is, if Florida State loses this game, it's my opinion that it becomes almost impossible for them to make the ACC championship game. When you look at the remaining schedules for teams like Virginia, Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Miami, the teams besides Florida State that most people would say have a shot here to get to the ACC championship game, the likelihood of enough of those teams losing 3 ACC games, which is what would have to happen for Florida State to get into the ACC championship game if they catch their second loss here, is very low. And unless you think that the ACC is going to get 3 teams into the college football playoff, then not making the ACC championship game means you're not going to the playoffs. And if you're Florida State, that's what they are up against here this week at home against Miami. Their second conference loss in as many weeks, with 6 or 7 games, whatever it is, still left to play. So even if Florida State were to lose to Miami, but then run the table the rest of the way and finish at 10-2, you would need Miami, Virginia, Georgia Tech, and Louisville to all have 2 or more losses. In the case of Virginia and Miami, you would need them to have 3 losses just to be tied with them. I don't think that's going to happen. So for that reason, if Florida State loses this game, I think they are all but eliminated from the college football playoff, and that puts a lot of pressure on Florida State here in this situation. Miami still has a mulligan. That's the way I really look at these regular season games now in the age of the 12-team playoff. And you can find examples of this from all of the major conferences from last season, the first year of the 12-team playoff. Outside of Oregon, nobody went undefeated last year. Oregon went undefeated, won the Big Ten, lost in the first round of the playoffs. Georgia went 10-2, won the SEC. Clemson was 9-3 and went on to win the ACC. So in and of itself, the loss doesn't eliminate you from anything, but because one of these Florida State losses was to Virginia, who is still undefeated in the ACC, Virginia, I've explained this, but Virginia lost to NC State early in the season. That was a non-conference game. Even though they're both in the ACC, that was scheduled as a non-conference game because Virginia and NC State were unable to fulfill their non-con schedule. So they scheduled each other as a non-con game. NC State won, Virginia lost. Virginia still has 0 conference losses. That was not a conference game. So they're going to be behind the 8 ball here, looking up at a awfully steep mountain, Florida State is, if they lose this game, whereas Miami would still has a mulligan. Miami could lose this game and still go on to make the ACC championship game and make the playoffs relatively easily. All they would have to do is win the games they're supposed to win. But as far as my pick on this game, getting back to how obnoxious these 2 fan bases are on the internet, Miami's been obnoxious forever. They still run around talking about 5 rings and an ESPN documentary from the 90s and Ed Reed, who basically is just a homeless man standing on their sideline at this point. Or actually, I guess he's not there anymore. He's gone now. Now Michael Irvin shows up there at the home game. But still, do you see the shots of the guy looks homeless on the sideline? These no-show, I don't know what their purpose is or why they're there. They're obviously not haven't done any good over the last few years. But they run around and talk about all this stuff like it matters. It just doesn't matter. 5 rings, Ed Reed, that stuff was a lifetime ago. None of it matters. They talk about it constantly. They're annoying. They're obnoxious. You can't find a single Miami fan that goes to games because no one goes to those games. The whole off-campus stadium deal. They're just annoying as hell. Florida State fans over the last 2 years have become the biggest group of crybabies I think I've ever seen in any area, sports or otherwise. They literally complain about everything. Everything is somebody else's fault. They're suing everybody. They're suing their own conference. They're suing their own TV partner. It's ESPN's fault that they didn't get in the playoffs the last year. It's Kirk Herbstreit's fault. It's his dog's fault. Now College Game Day is not going to this game. That means they were right. ESPN just hates Florida State. Why would College Game Day go to Florida State? Why? Everybody associated with Florida State on the internet has spent the last 2 years saying, fuck ESPN. I hate ESPN. I'm not watching ESPN. I don't want to have anything to do with ESPN. I hope they never come here. I hope I never see them. If I watch the game, I'm watching it on mute. I don't want to have nothing to do with them. So then ESPN goes, okay, fine. Well, we'll go to another game. Then we won't go there. Now they're on the internet going, I can't believe ESPN's not coming to Tallahassee for College Game Day. This is ridiculous. They just hate us. Yeah, they probably do hate you because everybody else hates you too. You're fucking annoying. You're annoying as shit. You whine and cry about the playoffs when you got left out and you lose 63-3 in your bowl game, and you come out the next year and go 2-10, and everything is everybody else's fault, and we don't make enough money from our TV contract, and this isn't fair because more people watch us than watch Wake Forest, and blah, 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 blah. Just a bunch of crybaby shit. So for my pick on this game, I've decided to go with the team that if they win, I feel like their fans will be a little bit less annoying than the other. So which fan base, if they win this game, will be more annoying? Miami fans or Florida State fans? Florida State fans. If Florida State wins this game, their fans will be unbearable, just like they were after they beat Alabama in week 1. Nobody had Florida State ranked in the preseason. They went 2-10 last year and flipped their roster over to the portal again. Nobody had them ranked. That was normal. They shouldn't have been ranked in the preseason. Then they come out and beat Alabama, and everyone ranked them, just like they should have. Florida State, that wasn't good enough for them. They had to be ranked higher. They had to be ahead of this team. Why do you have Florida State here and this team there? You need to move Florida State higher. They just hate Florida State. This is why preseason polls are today. Florida State needs to be in the top 5. I finally got so tired of hearing about it, I moved Florida State to my top 5. I had Florida State ranked 4th last week. So, this guy's just a hater. Well, then I'm a hater that had Florida State ranked 4th last week when you went on the road and shit the bed against Virginia. You took a giant running one all over your own foot on national television during the week, on a weekday, Friday night, a high school night, when everybody was watching because there was no other college football games on. You embarrassed yourself. And now that's somebody else's fault too. You just blame, and now they lost, and they're mad about where they dropped to in the ranking. All they do is cry and complain. Florida State fans wake up in the morning, they decide they're going to cry and complain, and then they figure out what it is they're going to cry and complain about as the day goes along. So for that reason, I'm going with Miami here. I want Miami to win. I would rather have to listen to Miami fans tell me how they beat Florida State and they're 5-0 or 4-0 and they're in the top 5 and they're going to winning it all. I'd rather listen to that next week after this game than have to listen to Florida State fans sound anything close to what they sounded like after week 1. So for that reason, I'm picking Miami to win the game. I hope they win by 100. Miami's favored by 4.5. I'm going to take Miami to win and Miami to cover. Fuck Florida State. Fuck their fans. Stop fucking crying. Not everything is somebody else's fault. Google accountability. Have a good morning.